when respected attorney Matthew Harris was publicly humiliated by bailiff Jonathan Redd in the heart of the courtroom, the very meaning of justice was thrown into question. Redd's actions, fueled by power and intimidation, stunned all those who believed in fairness. But Matthew found the courage to fight back at the most critical moment, with Judge Karen Wells forced to make a decisive ruling. Discover how this courtroom's tension exploded into a dramatic stand for dignity, and just wait until you see how justice finally prevails. Matthew Harris arrived at Atlanta Superior Court before dawn, feeling the weight of both expectation and history each time he climbed those weathered stone steps. The courthouse stood silent, austere against the orange glow of morning. Matthew paused, drawing a deep breath in the swirl of autumn air, his thoughts returning to countless stories of men and women who had stood here before him, chasing justice, fighting prejudice. Today, it was his turn again, and this time the stakes felt broader, reaching beyond his own career to the dignity of everyone watching. Inside, the halls buzzed with a tense energy. Secretaries moved quickly through their routines, officers reported for duty, and journalists set up cameras for what promised to be a newsworthy trial. Matthew's client, Elliot Brown, waited quietly in a side room, clutching a wrinkled folder full of hope and worry. Matthew joined him, offering a firm handshake and silent reassurance. He saw in Elliot the vulnerable reflection of so many who believed in the possibility of fairness. Courtroom 4B slowly filled. Families whispered anxiously, rival attorneys discussed points of law, and community activists gathered in the back, determined to bear witness. From his vantage at the defense table, Matthew surveyed the room, a sea of faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical, many simply curious, all part of the drama unfolding before them. Jonathan Redd, the court's bailiff, patrolled the aisle with a cool, purposeful gait. Years of military service had shaped him into a man of few words and rigid habits, respected for vigilance but also feared for a temper that sometimes surfaced. Today, Redd's presence felt even more pronounced, his gaze sweeping each row with clinical precision. There were rumors among courthouse regulars, whispered in break rooms and blurred between cases, of Redd's history of intimidation and a string of minor incidents never quite reaching disciplinary review. Matthew knew all this, had heard the murmurs, and prepared himself mentally for any complication. Judge Karen Wells sat at her bench, the model of composure and authority. She had earned her position by charting difficult waters, but her reputation for stern impartiality came matched with a reluctance to challenge the system she served. Her eyes flickered over the attorneys, the audience, the bailiff, never betraying private thoughts or allegiances. Proceedings began under a heavy silence. Matthew rose, the familiar sequence of motions settling his nerves. The prosecution framed Elliot as little more than a statistic in a broader pattern, while Matthew countered with painstaking evidence, challenging assumptions and prejudices. His words traced lines of fairness and hope, resonating through the grand room, a reminder that the law, at its best, protected the most vulnerable. But tension crackled just beneath the surface. When Matthew approached the prosecution bench to submit crucial documents, Jonathan Redd intercepted him with a sudden, forceful gesture. Redd's arm blocked Matthew's advance, a simple motion, but one heavy with meaning, halting the attorney in a public show of authority. The act was subtle enough to appear procedural, yet loaded with the silent message of exclusion and restraint. A hush fell across the chamber as observers registered what had happened. The sound of papers falling to the floor punctuated the moment. Elliot's composure crumbled. He watched the man defending his future suffer a calculated humiliation, and his own anxiety deepened into real fear. The court audience, once divided in interest, now bore witness to an indisputable act of disrespect. Eyes darted from the bailiff to the judge. Some were horrified, others just curious, but most felt a sudden, prickling unease. Matthew stood frozen for a heartbeat, pain radiating across his chest where Redd's arm had pressed with deliberate force. He realized acutely that this was no ordinary disruption. The message was clear. There were unspoken boundaries, and Matthew had been reminded of them in the most public way. He looked toward Judge Wells, expecting intervention, or at the very least a censure of the inappropriate conduct within her courtroom. Instead, the judge met Matthew's gaze with an impassive stare and said nothing. Her silence reverberated more powerfully than any verdict. The system, carefully built around rules and expectations, could still choose neutrality over justice. Conversations resumed in quiet, uneasy murmurs. Some attendees felt helpless, their outrage muted by formality and fear. Others glanced away, unwilling to confront the implications of what they had just seen. Matthew gathered his scattered papers, straightened his suit, and steadied his breath. Every muscle in his body ached with the raw sting of injustice, but he knew that surrender would only embolden prejudice. His thoughts became sharper, his focus more intent. Standing tall with renewed resolve, he rejoined Elliot at the defense table, determined that neither humiliation nor intimidation would define the day's proceedings. Throughout the next hour, Matthew's every word was imbued with a new intensity. The audience, although silent, watched closely. Some felt inspired by his perseverance, others wondered whether the system would tilt against him yet again. In the eyes of many present, the confrontation was not just about protocol or evidence, but about the larger questions of dignity, equality, and the quiet, would-be erosion of hope. As morning light filtered through the courthouse windows, Matthew Harris resolved that whatever obstacles lay ahead, he would refuse to be driven off course. Today his struggle was more than legal, a test of everything he stood for, right there in the heart of the courthouse, fighting for one voice among hundreds longing for the promise of justice. The echoes of the incident lingered long after the courtroom had returned to its routine. Matthew Harris sat quietly at the defense table, his composure outwardly restored, but beneath the surface an ache pulsed through him, a potent blend of humiliation, disappointment, and a growing sense of isolation. The impact of Jonathan Redd's actions had not only unsettled Matthew, it had also reverberated through every corner of the room, leaving in its wake an unspoken discomfort that refused to fade. Elliot Brown's anxiety deepened. He stole frequent glances at Matthew, searching for reassurance, finding instead the tension etched in his defender's features. Elliot's worry was more than personal. He sensed that the struggle unfolding before him was part of a larger battle, one in which every victory was hard-won and every setback carved another scar. For Elliot, Matthew had always represented hope and strength, the possibility of a fair fight in a system often indifferent to circumstance. But now the brief exchange with Redd called that hope into question, forcing Elliot to confront both his fears and his faith in those tasked with serving justice. The audience in the gallery reflected a range of emotions. Some whispered words of support, frustrated that such a public degradation could happen without consequence. Others sat with stoic faces, unwilling to comment, yet unable to shake the sense that something essential had been broken. Community members who had come hoping to witness a straightforward trial now struggled to reconcile their expectations with the uncomfortable reality playing out in front of them. Matthew tried to focus on his strategy. He reviewed his notes, adjusted his line of questioning, and prepared to present critical evidence. Yet with each word spoken, a heavy silence seemed to press around him, a reminder that trust in the process had been shaken. The courtroom, once a place where fairness was supposed to reign, now felt unpredictable and fraught with unseen dangers. Jonathan Redd conducted his duties with renewed vigilance, his demeanor unchanged, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. He moved through the aisles with authority, issuing terse instructions and maintaining the illusion of control. The history behind his reputation became all the more stark. Murmurs from courthouse staff over the years quietly discussed stories of intimidation, and moments when those who dared to complain saw their grievances brushed aside. Redd wasn't simply maintaining order, he was enforcing boundaries defined by his own standards. Judge Karen Wells pressed on with the case, her voice clear and unhurried as she managed the schedule, questioned counsel, and addressed legal minutiae. But there was a shift in the air. Those watching closely noted the subtle ways in which tension colored every interaction. Matthew's appeals for fairness seemed to hang in uncertainty. His efforts met with polite acknowledgement, rather than the robust support justice demanded. For Matthew, every moment became a test of endurance. He kept his posture strong and his tone controlled, refusing to show weakness or allow any further cracks to form. He knew that if he faltered here, it would send a message echoing far beyond this trial, a warning to all who might one day find themselves in vulnerable positions before the law. Elliot's confidence wavered. He remembered the stories his family had shared, accounts of hard-fought battles and bitter lessons learned in pursuit of equal treatment. Now, witnessing his own champion diminished, Elliot felt the sting of reality encroach on his hopes. Yet he watched as Matthew, undeterred by pain or threat, pressed onward with the defense, embodying a resilience that resonated deeply with everyone longing for a better outcome. In the wider gallery, activists and community leaders exchanged knowing looks. They understood, perhaps better than most, that progress was rarely smooth, that every small victory required persistence in the face of adversity. Their presence in the room was silent encouragement, a reminder that standing firm was as much for others as for oneself. Throughout the morning, Matthew's actions inspired quiet reflection. His refusal to concede, his unwavering advocacy, even after humiliation, became a lesson in dignity. Those who watched felt a shift in perspective. What had begun as a legal contest grew into something much larger, a confrontation with the faceless forces that shaped outcomes from the shadows. By midday, the immediate shock had faded, replaced by a mingled sense of sorrow and new solidarity. Matthew's pain was real, but it was not defeat. Instead, his endurance in the face of adversity reinforced the idea that justice, though wounded, could not be erased, that every act of courage, however subtle, contributed to the gradual restoration of faith. The trial pressed on, colored by the memory of that fateful moment, as Matthew and Elliot leaned on each other with newfound resolve. In that shared silence they drew strength from the knowledge that their battle, though painful, mattered deeply to all who watched and cared. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted, a new current of determination flowing beneath the surface, as Matthew Harris summoned a strength that was both quiet and resolute. The sting from the earlier incident still lingered in his mind and body, but it propelled him forward instead of holding him back. Matthew understood that this moment was no longer simply about proving a legal case. It was about reclaiming dignity, demanding respect, and showing unwavering courage in the face of adversity. He rose once again, this time with more purpose than ever before. His voice, steady and commanding, filled the solemn room as he addressed the gathered court. Your Honor, the incident involving Officer Red is not a matter that can be overlooked. It threatens the integrity of this trial and undermines the principles upon which this court stands. His words were precise and measured, crafted carefully to cut through the tension, yet charged with passion, born of personal conviction. Matthew's gaze swept across the courtroom, the faces filled with a mixture of surprise, intrigue, and cautious hope. He continued, articulating a compelling argument that went beyond mere legal procedure. He spoke of the fundamental right of every individual to be treated fairly, regardless of their background or their station in life. He reminded the court that respect was the foundation upon which justice was built, and to allow such an affront to go unchallenged would be to erode the very trust that society placed in its institutions. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, every ear tuned to his voice. Even the judge, who had so far maintained a reserved demeanor, appeared to weigh his words carefully. Matthew laid out his case with a mixture of legal expertise and heartfelt conviction that resonated deeply with many in attendance. His passion was not loud or dramatic, but carried a weight that could not be ignored. He called upon witnesses who spoke to the character and professionalism that Matthew had long exemplified. He presented evidence and legal precedents, making an unassailable case for ensuring that justice extended beyond the facts to the treatment of all participants in the judicial process. Slowly, the scales began to tip not immediately, but perceptibly as attention shifted toward fairness and accountability. In the gallery, Elliot watched with renewed hope. Seeing Matthew stand tall, unbowed by challenge, inspired a confidence that had been shaken, but not extinguished. The community members present felt the power of advocacy come alive before their eyes. It was a subtle but profound reminder that courage often manifests not in grand gestures but in persistence and unshakable belief in what is right. Judge Karen Wells finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I acknowledge the seriousness of Mr. Harris's concerns. Officer Red's conduct will be reviewed, and appropriate measures will be taken." The declaration sparked a quiet wave of relief through the courtroom. It was a moment of victory, not just for Matthew or Elliot, but for every person who had quietly hoped that justice might prevail. The mood softened, tension replaced by a sense of possibility. Matthew allowed himself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. This was more than a legal triumph. It was an affirmation that resilience and integrity could overcome even the most entrenched obstacles. Though the battle was far from over, this turning point illuminated a path forward. Matthew, Elliot, and all who witnessed this day understood that perseverance could bring even the most daunting challenges within reach of change. The courtroom had become more than a stage for conflict. It was a symbol of hope, a testament to the strength found in standing firm. With the judge's words still resonating, Matthew felt a renewed fire within him. The struggle ahead would demand courage and stamina, but it was one he was ready to face, knowing that today justice had moved a little closer to being served. The late afternoon filtered through the stained glass windows, bathing the courtroom in warm tones that felt more hopeful than the tension earlier in the day. Matthew Harris remained at the defense table, taking in the steady transformation that swept through the room. For hours, every gesture and every word had seemed weighted by the earlier injustice. Yet now, as attention focused on Judge Karen Wells, a palpable suspense settled. Matthew felt the resolve he had hardened through adversity grow even stronger, anchored by the knowledge that what happened next would matter, both for himself and for everyone watching. Judge Wells sat quietly for a drawn-out moment, her eyes lingering on the file before her, and then casting a glance over those present. She understood, perhaps more deeply in that instant, the silent cries for fairness and respect. Her verdict spoke not only to the mechanics of law, but to the heart of the community looking for accountability. "This court is not just a forum for facts and evidence," she intoned, "but a place where every person must feel protected and respected. The actions of Officer Red are subject to immediate suspension and investigation, with oversight by an independent committee. To preserve the integrity of this court and restore faith in the justice process, these standards will be upheld without exception." A wave of emotion followed her words. Relief, gratification, and even a subtle sense of vindication rippled through the crowd. Matthew could see activists nodding quietly, neighbors gripping each other's hands, and journalists scribbling the historic moment into their notebooks. It was a subtle triumph, one that defied cynicism and ignited a quiet fire of hope within the hearts of many. Elliot Brown observed the turn of events with awe. Throughout the trial, he had struggled with uncertainty and fear, his belief in fairness wavering in the face of adversity. But the defense his attorney had mounted, unyielding, brave, and full of conviction, restored something profoundly important. Elliot felt a new sense of belonging, not just in the outcome of his own case, but in the possibility that dignity truly was worth fighting for. As the courtroom emptied, community members gathered at the exit, whispering their thoughts on what the day's events meant for the neighborhood, for the legal system, and for future generations. Some offered Matthew a nod of gratitude, acknowledging the difficulties he had confronted and the door he had helped unlock. Others encouraged Elliot, giving him words of encouragement for a life shaped, at least in part, by the perseverance he witnessed. Reporters lingered to record reactions, and local leaders quietly discussed how the precedent set in this trial could foster changes in other areas, encouraging more transparency, calling for greater oversight, and inspiring others to step forward when they see wrongs that need mending. Matthew stepped outside, pausing on the courthouse steps as city lights flickered to life. He remembered the small moments, the trembling in Elliot's hand, the subtle nods from community members, the stern quiet in the judge's expression, and the hush that blanketed the courtroom just before the ruling. These fragments came together into something whole-proof, that even a single day marked by courage and resistance could reshape stories and inspire belief. The journey ahead would not be simple or easy, but for everyone present, the day ended with something resembling hope, Justice felt just a little less distant, a little more real, echoing in the footsteps of those who left the courthouse with renewed conviction. For Matthew, the fatigue of adversity was matched by the satisfaction of having stood his ground, proving that the principles of dignity and respect were not just ideals, but lived realities, created anew each time someone rose to defend them, no matter how unforgiving the odds.